Welcome to Rising from the Rubble, the podcast where we share real life stories of people who have faced life-changing events like burnout, redundancy, and depression, and found a way to rise stronger than before. I'm your host, Maria Newman, and as a coach, I help individuals navigate life's toughest transitions. Whilst listening to this podcast, you'll hear inspiring stories and coaching insights that will empower you to reclaim your confidence, redefine your future, and rise from your own rubble. It's now time to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to our episode. Hello, Kay. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Maria. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're most welcome. So, what makes your story meaningful to others?
I think the thing that makes it most meaningful is people in a similar position to what I was in feel they're alone, and my story shows them that they're not.
Oh, I love it. Who will benefit the most from hearing your story?
I would say people who have got anxiety, depression, PTSD, maybe new mums, maybe ex-military, people who are a bit rocky.
I like that word. That's a good descriptor. And what's the most important takeaway from your story?
The most important takeaway I've had is we can control our own thoughts.
And on that note, let's dive straight in. So, Kay, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in Bath 70 years ago, and I was an only child of my mum and dad. My mum did have two other children, but from my mum and dad, I was the only one, and I was brought up as an only child, which was great until I was 3. My dad was away in the RAF until I was 3. And when my dad came home, the dynamics changed pretty rapidly. My dad was a very young man. There's only 22 years between me and my dad. And he had no idea how to be a father. My mum obviously knew how to be a mum. She'd already had 2 children. And he was jealous. He wanted my mum all to himself. He didn't want me. I wasn't planned. I was a mistook. So he... I suppose in many ways, he was trying to help me. That's what he tells me anyway, that he was trying to help me by moving my goalposts every time I got near to them. But instead of that, he got me that I didn't laugh, I didn't smile. I went very insular. I went very much that I had a chip on my shoulder, to the fact that when I was 18, I'd met a guy. He was my sister's ex-boyfriend, and my father didn't like him and told me if I was going to meet him, not to bother to go home. This was the year that the consent age came down to 18, and I was 18. So I left home and I married my then boyfriend. It didn't work out because my mum and dad drip fed me all different things that in the end we split. And I went back home to live, which didn't work out either because I was treated like a little schoolgirl. I was about 21 by now. And I wasn't a little schoolgirl, I was a married woman. So I went on a blind date and met a guy. And we both decided that we would get married because he didn't like living with his sister and I didn't like living with my mum. There was no love between us whatsoever. It was a marriage of convenience, if you like. Anyway, a few years into the marriage, we were out drinking and we met my ex-husband and his then wife. And we started meeting up as a foursome. But then we started meeting up as a twosome. And I decided I was going back to my ex-husband. And he drowned. So my depression hit the roof, if you like. I didn't know at the time I was depressed. I hadn't been diagnosed by this time. And my thoughts to fill that big gaping hole in my heart was to have a baby. He'll be 45 next May. So I did have my baby. I didn't know at the time that my husband didn't really want a baby, but I soon found out because every time my baby cried, I got punched. not where it showed. Nobody knew about me getting punched, not even my mum. I didn't tell anybody. Anyway, things went on and my son started school. And it turned out that my son was being a little bit of a pain in the neck in school. And he had to go and see a child psychologist. And the child psychologist told me that the problems with my son was sat next to me. So I divorced him. So that left me and my son, and my depression lifted a bit. It wasn't quite so heavy to carry around. But then I was asked by a lady that I was working with, or suggested that we both join different dating agencies and compared notes. So I thought, I think my son was going to boarding school by this time. I thought, well, it's one way of wasting time. So I did, and I seen quite a few men. I had my money's worth, let's put it that way. I had quite a few dinners out. And then I had a phone call, and it was a Welshman. And I told him no, I wasn't going to meet up with him. I'd already got about 3 men already in my diary that I was going to meet, and I didn't think I could add another. And I went to work the next day, and I couldn't get his voice out of my head. That was 35 years ago. We've been married 35 years. It was in the April of 1989 that we met. In the July, we got engaged. And in the December, we got married. I will add, on that first date, we actually talked about how long we wanted to see each other, how long we'd be engaged, how many children we'd have. None of that happened. None of that happened. It just, we were on a crest of a wave and we had no chance of jumping off. And if I'm honest, it's still like that today. So I met Mr. Right. The following year, I had a baby. Now, Mr. Right knew that I had a son with problems, and he knew that we were a package, and he was quite happy to take us on. But he didn't know that I had problems because I'd hidden them. They were gone, as you know, I was normal until I had my baby. And then oomph, the depression came back with a vengeance. And I went to see my doctor, and because all I wanted to do was shut myself under the stairs, thinking I was the only one that was, going through all these different emotional challenges. The doctor sent me to a lady called Sue, who was a counsellor, and she put all my problems into boxes, tied them up with pink ribbons, and left me with the thought that my dad was a bully. So for the next 3-4 years, things were okay until my daughter started school. As she started school, my son's school decided that I needed to go and see a counsellor because it was me that had the problems, not my son. I'd had such a wonderful experience. Off I trotted. Worst thing I ever did, because it was a guy who had an agenda, and he probably was a great counsellor because he ticked every box on his agenda and opened every box that Sue had already shut for me, leaving me telling the ladies at the school gate that I was going to drive off the Severn Bridge. One of the ladies was a drug addict counsellor, and she came up to me and she said, "Hey, would you please stop going to see whoever it is you're going to see? Because one day you're not going to say a word about driving off the Severn Bridge. We'll hear about you driving off the Severn Bridge on the 6 o'clock news." Now I'm back at square one. In fact, I think I'm probably worse than square one. My depression was at its deepest, at its depth. And I'd had nowhere to turn because Sue had retired. I had nowhere to go and I was scared. And I lived like that, or should I say we lived like that, because it affected the whole family. We lived like that until my daughter was 13. And when my daughter was going in 13, my mother had suggested, when my daughter was 12 actually, that we moved over to Wales. My husband was Welsh, his parents were Welsh, and his father had just died. So I said, "Mum, Ian is sorting out his father's funeral. I cannot suggest to him that we move to Wales." She said, "I'm telling you to do so." So I told my sister-in-law's husband what my mum had said, and he said, "Tell him." The rest is history. We moved over to Wales. Well, I did with my daughter when she was going on 13. My husband stayed in Bristol because he worked there. So he only came home at weekends. So you can imagine there's me with my depression, probably going through the menopause as well, and a 13-year-old with teenage hormones. It was hell on earth. There was no other way of describing it. I had a job and I went to the job every day and everything was okay because I was scared to say boo to a goose. I didn't want to lose the job until one weekend. I'd been there about 13 months. I needed to go to Bristol instead of my husband coming to Wales because I needed to see my mum and dad. My daughter wouldn't come. So I'm angry. I'm angry when I get to Bristol. I'm angry when I come back from Bristol. And I didn't come home. I went straight to work on the Monday morning. My boss said something I didn't like, and I answered him and got sacked on the spot. 3 days before payday, it took me a 12 months to get that month's pay, but I did get it. And I got the freedom that I needed because on the next day, I had a phone call from Carmarthenshire County Council asking me to go for an interview, which I did, and I got the job. After I'd worked for them for about 6 months as a temp, the office that I was temping in decided they didn't need me. And I thought, oh gosh, no job. Here goes. But I got sent to a different office, and the lady there was spiritual. She actually went to a spiritualist church. And once she'd got used to the fact that I wasn't going to disappear anywhere, she began to feel sorry for me. She began to feel sorry for the fact that all I was doing was going to work and going home and arguing with my daughter. So she suggested I went to the church with her. At first, I didn't want to go. I was very reluctant to go. I'd been to churches. I'd been a Sunday school teacher in the past, and it didn't do anything for my depression. So I didn't really want to go, but she persuaded me. And whilst there, I met a medium. And I did the same thing with her. I sat in her meditation circle, her development circle, purely to get away from my daughter. But the magic began to work. When I was a baby, I'd been scratched by a black and white cat. At the time, I was dreaming about cats. I didn't know it was a black and white cat. But I started to dream about cats. And the medium that I was with said to me, I think you should go and get a cat, Kay. I said, don't be stupid. I said, how can I go and get a cat? I can't feed a cat. If it comes rubbing against my legs, I'll run a mile. And she said, Spirit is telling you you need to go and get a cat. Now, the cats I was dreaming about was a tabby cat and then a ginger cat. I spoke to my husband about getting a cat. And he said, yeah, of course, I want a cat. He'd had a cat as a kid and he wanted a cat. So we went looking for cats. And I went to this cattery not far from where I was working to look at a ginger Tom. Oh, that's what I was told it was. It was a black and white one. I walked through a sea of cats. If there was one, there was 100 cats there. I'd walked through all of them. But as soon as this cat started to walk towards me, I wanted to run. The woman wasn't very pleased with me. She said, you told me you'd got over your phobia. And I said, well, I did, but I can't be around that cat. I said, so it must have been a black and white one that scratched me. She said, well, I got the ideal cat for you. It's a she, not a Tom, and she's a silver tortoiseshell, which meant she was tabby and ginger. So we ended up with her. We did get her. And after that, we had another kitten from the farm close by, which was a ginger Tom, and he's still with us. The first cat, unfortunately, isn't. She'd been thrown out of a car and died with a blood clot 7 years later. So we got another one. We got one that looks a bit like Red Riding Hood, but she won't come into our house because I frightened her off with my daughter's dog. But my phobia is gone. So that was one good thing that came out of sitting with the medium. She also asked me to do a tarot card workshop with her. I paid my money. I got my cards. I took my cards home and I threw them in the bin. I wasn't ready to read tarot cards, which sounds very silly when you think what I do for a living today. But that medium took me to an academy in Swansea where they taught people to be mediums. She wanted to show the class how mediums work on platform. And that was the biggest favour she ever did me, because on their wall was a self-awareness course being advertised. And I signed up for it. So I self-counselled, because that's all self-awareness is. But as with the first counsellor, the second counsellor had also told me my dad was a bully. And it came out again that he was a bully during my self-awareness course. And I confronted him. He denied it, of course. Anyway, after that, I was doing this self-awareness course and I met a young lady who was doing a tarot card workshop. My friend who'd started me off on this journey wanted to read tarot cards, so she told me. And she wouldn't go to this workshop unless I joined her. So she'd done some wonderful stuff for me, so I went along to the tarot card workshop. And that's what it was all about. It was Spirit's way of getting me to that workshop, because it was me that read the tarot cards, not her. After a few years, I was told I was counselling, coaching when I was reading cards, because I don't read them in the conventional manner. And I needed to go and get qualified. So I did NLP. Now, NLP and my self-awareness course were very similar apart from the price. So I took an instant dislike to the NLP. I probably do use it today, unconsciously. But the tutor said to me, I know you don't like it, Kay. You don't feel it goes with your tarot card readings, but how about kinetic shift? So I said, what on earth is that? She said, well, it's a mishmash of different therapies that Carl Smith put together because he had PTSD and he found that a little bit of all these therapies helped him. So he put them all together. So I signed up for it. I thought I'd got rid of my depression. After all, I'd been self-awareness. I'd done NLP, so I thought I was cured. And I felt so different. But I didn't feel as different as I did when I walked out of that kinetic shift workshop. I was now a qualified kinetic shift practitioner, and I felt on top of the world. My depression, dregs and all, had all gone. That must be about 12 years ago now, and I've never looked back. That workshop was in Cardiff. I live in a little fishing town in Carmarthenshire, which is about 50 miles away. And driving home, I made a promise that I would help as many people as I could, not to live their lives like I did. I was in my 50s when I finally got cured. Why wait that long? All it was the fact that I could control my thoughts. I could stop thinking of my father as the bully. I could keep him at arm's length. I wouldn't do what people suggested and cut him out of my life altogether. He's my dad at the end of the day. And I live my life to my full now, to the fact that I manifest things that I want. And one of those things that I wanted was just before Brexit, I wanted to go and live in Spain and run retreats. And whilst we were over there, we stayed over there for a month in a place called Almeria. And a lady in Swansea was sending me different properties so that if we wanted to go and look at them, we could go down to the estate agents and arrange it. And she sent me one which was ideal. It would have transformed into a retreat fairly easily. When my husband was frog marching me down to the estate agents, I said to him, where are we going? He said, to the estate agents. Why? I said, I thought we were going to the beach. He said, no, we're going to the estate agents so that we can go and look at that property. I said, I don't want that property. I don't want to work in Spain. I like the lifestyle too much. So we decided we would move. But Brexit came along, followed by COVID. So the idea got shelved after he'd played with my emotions a little bit and said, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So in March this year, we were sat in a tapas bar in Almeria in Spain. And he just suddenly looked at me and he said, we're going to do it. And I said, we're going to do what? He said, we're going to move to Spain. And I said, don't start that nonsense again. He said, no, I'm serious. We're going to move to Spain. So it must be about 6 weeks ago now. We went to see if we liked a place, a town because it was close to some friends that we've got in Spain. And we didn't go with the intention of buying. Now, when we've been before, when he was playing with my emotions, we've always gone with the intention of buying and haven't bought. But this time we didn't have any intention of buying, and we've ended up buying. So when you have a dream, don't give up on it. Because as long as you're thinking about what you want, the universe in time, when the time is right, will grant your wishes. So that's me, Maria.
Oh my goodness, Kay. Your life has not been standing still at any moment. You have dealt with many life events and lived many chapters.
I have indeed, because when I divorced my second husband, he tried to run me off the road with my little boy in my car, but he didn't succeed, thankfully.
So I want to take you back because obviously there's, like we've said, this podcast is about life events and dealing with what life puts in front of you. So I want to go back first of all to when you first started to go through depression. Was there for you a trigger point, or was it as a consequence of other many events?
I think when I first started, only I wasn't diagnosed then, was when my father told me to leave home. I think it had I can't say the word, communicated into depression. I don't think I was that girl with a chip on their shoulder and angry at life. I think that anger was depression, only I didn't know it. And I didn't think that anybody else would ever feel like I was feeling. I felt very much this was my problem. Nobody else feels like this. Nobody else's father treats them like this. No, this is my problem. Nobody is like this. Well, I've got news for everybody that's listening. There's loads of us out there that are treated like it, and there's loads of us that feel like it. The second time that it really reared its ugly head was when my son went to school. Because my son was my life, he was my world. My husband was hitting me. I didn't particularly like being around him for company. So my son had become my world, and my world was taken away from me because he went to school, because he had to. He was old enough to go to school. And I was diagnosed with depression because I did go to the doctors because I couldn't stop crying. And he suggested I went to work or took Valium. I didn't take the Valium. I went to work. So I did know I had depression. I knew I had depression when I divorced my ex-husband. And so I think it was it's all been communicative because it started when I was 3 years old, really, when those dynamics changed. And let's face it, that's what most things are. It's when our dynamics change. You know, these people that suffer with PTSD, it's not necessarily what they've witnessed. It's the fact that the dynamics in their life has changed. And we can change those dynamics back. And I never thought that that was possible until I had kinetic shift. And then I knew that you can. So, it can be lots of different things. One incident can cause depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever. People say these days about fibromyalgia. I have worked with people with fibromyalgia and have helped them to manage that pain. I'm not saying I've cured them because I haven't. I'm not a doctor. I can say I can shift depression, anxiety, and PTSD. They can manage their fibromyalgia. They can manage their sleep apnea because I've worked with people with it. I think kinetic shift is the miracle that everybody at some point should have a taste of, because I had a client come and have kinetic shift, and that's how she ended. She said, I think everybody should have one of these. Everybody should have a session of this. She said, because I feel as if I've been cleansed. And I think the thing is, this day and age, we forget we're beings being human. We are not human beings. And I know that sounds a bit controversial, but we are that being. There's that spirit within us, and it doesn't matter whether we're religious or not. Even atheists have got that spirit within them, because if they get into difficulty, the first thing they say is, God help me. So we've got that wonderful being within us, but we get so much rubbish put into our heads that we cover up that being, and we need to reconnect to that being and to start to love that being. Because until we love ourselves, Maria, life isn't really worth living, whether you've got depression or not.
That is such a good point. And I think as humans, even if we're spirits living a human existence, if we don't like ourselves and we don't like who we are on the inside, then quite frankly, the outside is irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, when I was sitting with that medium, after the cat incident and the tarot card incident, I actually did say to her, her name was Audrey, and I said, Audrey, I don't like myself. She said, well, if you don't like yourself, Kay, who do you want to be? And my answer was, I want to be that 3-year-old little girl who used to bend over backwards and laugh. She said, well, you can't be her, can you? You're an adult. I got news for Audrey. I am that 3-year-old little girl, only she's all grown up now. But I can bend over backwards and laugh, and I do laugh, and I do smile, and I do have fun. I do all those things that I should have done as a teenager, as a woman in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even in my 50s. I've done it in my 60s, and by God, I'm going to do it in my 70s. My biggest regret is my children had to wait till they were grown up to really get to know their mum. And they say they wouldn't have changed me, but I think they would.
Oh, okay. I've got two questions that are sort of the same thing, but from different perspectives. The first one is if there is someone like your daughters, your husband, who is living with someone who is going through depression, what is the one thing that they can do for that individual that would be useful?
The one thing I believe they can do that would be useful is not to judge them. My daughter thought I was the most horrible thing since sliced bread, because she actually asked my husband why he married me. She's so horrible, Dad. Why did you marry her? And he showed her a picture of when we got married. And she said, oh, I can see why. And he said, and your mother's not like you know her, because he had seen beyond that. And now I think she realizes that that's why. And I think the biggest thing that anybody can do when somebody with depression is having a meltdown is to give them a cuddle, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking to be loved. They're feeling very unloved, very unworthy, very much just like a blot on the horizon, that they shouldn't be here. And unfortunately, because we don't do that and we don't pick up the signs, is why a lot of people decide to walk off the planet, which is very sad, because that could have been me if it hadn't been for that lady down at the school gates.
So that is a perfect moment for me to ask my other question that's quite similar. For those individuals who are listening to this recording and they've been in your shoes, what one thing can they do for themselves that will make a difference and help them?
The one thing they can do for themselves is to ask for help. Asking for help is not a weakness, but people aren't mind readers. Even as a tarot card reader, I am not a mind reader. I'm a tarot card reader. Nobody knows what's going on in your head apart from you. So unless you ask for help, nobody can help you. There's several ways of getting help. There's lots of phone numbers out there that you can phone and get help from. Your doctor will help you. There's therapists that will help you. You don't even have to sign up for a therapy with most of us. You just got to come along and have a chat. And people have told me by just having a chat like you and I are today, it gives them a different perspective on their lives. So they need to ask for help.
Some people will be saying to themselves, I really want to ask for help. It just feels too hard. What would you say to those individuals?
I would say to them, come to somebody like myself then, because, I've been to counsellors where you have to pick the scab, and there's nothing wrong with that. If somebody wants to vocalize their problems, I vocalized mine today. They're not my problem anymore. But I didn't want to admit that I was being hit. I didn't want to admit that my dad was a bully. I didn't want to admit there was anything wrong with me, really. If it hadn't been for Sue, I probably never would have. And I probably wouldn't be happily married now. He probably would have gone years ago. But with Kinetic Shift, you don't have to go over your story. The only person that has to face that story is yourself. So find a therapist like myself where you don't have to vocalize if you don't want to vocalize. There's so many different people out there now that can help. And it can be vocalized or non-vocalized. But the main thing is you need to get that help because life is short. I would say in some ways I wasted 50 years of my life. On the other hand, it gave me such a fantastic story to share with other people and to draw upon when I'm reading cards or doing therapies or whatever. So no, I didn't waste it. It was an education. Would I change it? Probably not, because it's made me who I am today. And today I love my life, I love my kids, and I love my grandkids. So, life is worth living. And of course, there's always that wave that I've yet to jump off of, that my husband and I are still surfing on.
Oh, I love it. So, as we come to a close on this podcast episode, I have 2 questions still left for you. The first one is, what 3 things would you like our listeners and viewers to take away from this conversation?
I think the first thing I would like them to take away is they're not on their own. We all feel that we're on our own, and we're not. There's so many people out there suffering with different types of mental health. Because let's face it, depression, anxiety, and PTSD is mental health. But at the end of the day, every person has mental health. It's just, used in the wrong way. We've got physical health, we've got mental health. Sometimes we're good, sometimes it's not so good. So, mental health is no different than physical health. The second thing I'd like them to take away is don't try and split their mental health from their physical health. Because it's all one. We're mind, body, and soul. So don't try and departmentalize them like our doctors are trained to do. They do it that way because they can only qualify in one field, really. But life is 3-dimensional. And the third one, now that's a hard one. I think the third one has to be practice telling yourself how much you love yourself. And I know it sounds very easy, but it's not. Because you can look in a mirror or a window where you can see your own reflection. You can say, for example, yourself, Maria, you would say, Maria, I love you. And if you don't love you, you could probably burst into tears. So it's not easy, but it does get easier. And the more you practice it, the more you begin to love yourself, and the more you are able to ask for help, because you'll know that you're worth it.
And we are all worth it.
We definitely are. Absolutely.
And finally, Kay, I know people will be listening and watching and going, Kay, she is amazing. I need to connect with her. So let's make it easy for them. How can others connect with you?
Well, I have got a website, and it's very easy to find because it's just called kdowney.co.uk. There's a form on there that they can connect with me. They don't have to send me an email. They just fill in the form and I will connect with them. There's actually a free It's a PDF with major arcana cards read generically. They can get that, and I will contact them with the PDF, and obviously they'll have my email address then, and I will keep their email address if they want me to for my newsletter. Or they can find me by looking up Kay Downey on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to say thank you very much, Kay, for sharing your story and being so open and honest with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And thank you everybody else for listening and watching. Thank you for listening to Rising from the Rubble. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Also, remember to download your free life assessment. Just click the link in the description to get started. Take care, and remember, every setback is an opportunity for growth. I'll see you next time.